everybody. My name is Dr. Helen Jenkins. I'm from Oxera, and it's with great pleasure that I've been invited to contribute to this roundtable discussion on news media and digital platforms for the Competition Committee of the OECD. I have some slides that I'm going to walk us through here. But first, just a disclaimer that Oxera has worked for a range of different companies such as Google, Facebook, and Amazon in this area, as well as industry bodies such as the Computer and Communication Industry Association, CCIA, also Allied for Startups for small businesses in this area, and the Motion Picture Association. We've also worked for consumer organizations such as Which on questions around the changing face of digital media. Our research in this area has spanned topics ranging from the cross-border supply of content and reforms to copyright, to the value that digital platforms offer to society, and the best ways to enhance oversight of these firms with new tools such as the DSA and the Digital Markets Act, and the role of data and privacy protections within the digital ecosystem. So today, we're going to be talking about the debate on competition issues in news media and digital, and this touches on many different areas. There are some blurred lines and tensions across the different competitive factors, and so in this video I'm going to do a short overview of those tensions, but focus my discussion on the important dynamics that need to be balanced when considering the sharing of news content on digital platforms. So what should we be considering in understanding how these relationships work? The digital news media value chain is complex, and where there are competition issues to be investigated, it's crucial to reflect on understanding the nature of any underlying market failures. Without understanding where those theories of harm are coming from as a foundation, appropriate actions and remedies may not be taken. So here we see four key aspects of interactions between content providers, platforms, and their audiences. If we take the top left first, competitive conditions in each market, whether we're talking about the platforms, the content providers, advertising, these are areas where we know that there's lots of questions about what the right competitive environment is to support effective markets for platforms. So these are affected by rules on the protection of content, so copyright, and the rules on liability for content, such as the Internet Intermediary Liability. And this will affect controls over how content is disseminated, and who is paid and how much they are paid. A tension arises between competition and liability around the types of innovation and choice that can be supported in these markets. There are also fairness concerns about who gets access to content in terms of downstream distributors of content that is provided upstream, and if that distorts those downstream markets. There's also can be fairness concerns about how value is shared within that value chain and who gets to reap the main benefits for content that is desirable to the end audience. And finally, data and privacy, an area that I know you've discussed on other occasions, which is around audience information. And this affects who gets shown which content, the extent of the targeting of advertising, and again, how value is shared between platform and content provider. So there are tensions between each of these, which means any enforcement around platforms in this space needs to be alive to the broader policy environment across all of these areas to understand the likely interactions and ensure that all consequences from any interventions are indeed intended to occur. So with that general overview, I want to turn now to news media and digital platforms, or perhaps creative content and digital platforms, and just talk through the three sorts of issues that can arise in this area, and this spectrum of different issues that we see start from competition type concerns, go through questions of how we might standardize access to information and how that information is delivered to viewers, and then into some social welfare concerns about privacy, disinformation, misinformation, and how regulation might need to engage with that, but doing that through the lens of competition law and competition policy. And in that, there are 3 distinct groups, each with different implications for competition and regulation. Ad tech, which looks a lot at the share of revenues received by news media and how that revenue is gathered. Content display, so consumer platforms and how the control of consumer attention works. And then recommendation engines, the driving of traffic, what sort of news media is put in front of which viewers, which audience, and issues of mis and disinformation. And I'm going to talk about each of these 3, but actually going to focus on the latter 2, the content display and the driving traffic. So in terms of the first topic, which was ad tech and the share of revenues, I'm going to only very quickly touch on this topic because that has been well rehearsed in other committee meetings and also by regulatory authorities such as the CMA and ACCC. So with the increasing shift towards digital news content, online ads are becoming a key revenue source for news publishers. However, it may not be sufficient to replace the traditional offline revenues that have funded important journalism and social democratic content. So digital advertising platforms do enable news publishers and other content providers who host advertising on their web space, so sell their own advertising inventory, that helps them to better monetize their online content by matching them with advertisers and facilitating the ad transaction. But a key distinction between modern digital advertising and traditional offline advertising is that the ad tech stack helps advertisers follow specific types of audiences wherever they may be. So in the past, you may have had car manufacturers advertising new cars in the motoring section of print media. Now, an advertiser can address consumers that have shown an interest in making a car purchase wherever they may be. That's no longer restricted to a news or print media content. It could be a video sharing site, a recipes web page, or it could be while they're doing their emails. So there may be more competition for getting eyeballs and audience because there's a wider range where you can collect those eyeballs that are relevant to the content, whereas in the past, print media, news media were a way of ensuring you had people at the same time with similar interests looking at your advertisement. Now, several authorities around the world, including the CMA and the ACCC, have undertaken studies to better understand how these markets function. And in doing this, they have found evidence of high market shares, particularly Google, across many layers of the ad tech stack, and also Facebook being another important player. The CMA found that this ad tech stack takes around 35% of the total ad revenue, leaving around 65% for publishers. And the CMA study acknowledged that ad tech does add value and left open the question of whether this is indeed a fair share, but did note it was higher than the offline equivalent share. Instead, they focused on pro-competitive recommendations to ensure that at the consumer-facing platform level and the attention of consumers, that was working in a pro-competitive and effective way. So I'm going to leave the questions around ad tech and effective competition of digital ads now and focus on the other issues affecting news publishers' online presence, which may have different underlying drivers of the market issues. So the second topic around content display is around consumer platforms, the control of consumer attention, and how this interacts with news media. Now, these consumer-facing platforms play an increasingly important role in the digital news value chain by intermediating the distribution of news from publishers to end consumers. These platforms can generate benefits for publishers and consumers through aggregating, matching, and/or curating content. But intermediation mechanisms could also potentially give rise to harms. So in the context of news dissemination, a distinction should be drawn between two types of consumer-facing platforms. Social media platforms, such as Facebook and Twitter, they provide an online channel for news publishers to reach end consumers by presenting news content alongside other forms of content, for example, videos, user-generated content. And these platforms are typically ad-funded. News aggregation platforms, such as Google News, Apple News, also present a distribution channel, and it is also aggregated, but here they bring together a range of different news content. So you go there when you want news and you want it from a variety of sources, rather than getting your news interspersed between the other content that you're looking at on your social media platform. These latter news aggregation platforms also can employ a subscription-based funding model at times. So these platforms can deliver significant benefits to news publishers because the news publishers are supplying content, but then the platforms through their distribution can generate traffic for those publishers, including clicking through to the publisher's own site where they can generate other benefits. Now, the publishers need to receive revenue to appropriately reflect and reward their provision of that content and the investment they have to make in order that that is a sustainable flow of content and of a quality that is meeting the needs of the audience. The platforms typically benefit from economies of scale and scope and strong network effects. And so a successful platform will be reaching an increasingly wide audience, matching consumers' preferences and enabling users to engage with and share the news to others within the network. So those benefits can be very important to the platform operator. And I'm in a moment going to present some evidence we've gathered on the benefits that these platforms bring to news content providers, and talk about then what this means for the bargain between the two when you are balancing those two interests. The third topic I'm going to touch on is how the dynamics between platforms and content providers can interact with ensuring there is the right incentive to provide good quality news content. So there can be concerns of market failures around adverse selection, where bad quality news drives out good quality because of clickbait-fueled advertising funding, as an example. And we'll discuss a little how competition policy interacts with this issue and whether other tools are going to be needed to address this important concern with the broader social policy goals of ensuring plurality and social and democratic legitimacy. So this slide is showing some recent research we did earlier this year, which you can find on the Oxera website, for which was commissioned by Facebook, looking at the benefits that flow from content providers using digital platforms as a means of sharing the content they've provided. So creative industries need to get their content out to audiences, and digital platforms have transformed the ways in which people discover this content. In considering relevant interventions in the relationship between news media and platforms, it's important to think about the balancing between content and distribution interests. So to inform this debate, we were asked to investigate how digital platforms do benefit creative industries in the EU through 4 key mechanisms: reach, engagement, conversion, and optimization. We tested, and in a number of examples, as much as we could, we quantified each part of that framework through a series of commissioned business and consumer surveys. So we gathered a lot of public domain evidence with sharing results from both consumers and creators, which you can find in the main report. Here I'm highlighting one area, which was around the fact that consumers are more likely to respond and react to content that their friends have engaged with. And this was particularly true for sponsored content. So sponsored content, apologies. So where a platform shows some sponsored content, but then one of your friends actually engages with that and shares it and draws your attention to it, you are then much more likely to engage with that and then yourself interact with that, which triggers other people's engagement. And this was for published content, including news. And it does this through conferring social value on it. So your interaction on the platform confers social value. And so that's of benefit to the content provider, since it's increasing the value of the content that it provides. So what does this mean? Well, we can think about this in a Nash bargaining framework where creators and distributors are both adding value to the other, and they both need each other in order to have a valuable offer to the end audience. So if we think about the sort of standard approach, which is to say that clearly the content has value to the platform, and if you're thinking about how you would then bargain over that value, you would expect to see under a Nash bargaining framework, assuming similar weight of outside options for the content provider and the platform, that you'd end up splitting the value of the content between the two. And that's sort of deal one as it's shown here. But as we've just seen, there can also be a value to publishers of the promotion and the increase in reach and engagement from being available on the platform. And that value can be not just in terms of more audience, but also in real revenue associated with advertising, or if people click through and then subscribe, or in other ways generate revenue for the publishers. Now, in this example, as we've done it, if you think in terms of the Nash bargaining framework, you would see, you can imagine a scenario where you would not see any transfer of value between creator and distributor, because it's equally balanced, the value on both sides. And indeed, you could also have a situation where the value to the publisher is actually higher than the value of the content to the platform, and you actually see the payments going the other way. And we see some examples of that when we think about the television platforms, where these types of payments may have gone in that way. And it's just important when thinking about balancing between creators and distributors, thinking about it in this type of framework can inform issues in this area. And so then the final topic to cover on in this video is going back to this question around where platforms are steering consumers and towards certain types of content, and whether there are tensions between competition and consumer protection issues around adverse selection. So the challenge is that we know that in the short run, adverse selection can drive platforms to develop echo chambers, clickbait type content, lower quality content that captures consumer attention and drives ad related revenue. But in the long run, platforms do have a natural incentive to prefer a high quality and trusted platform, because it is risky to become a market for lemons in terms of being known as a platform with low quality content. And this is a long run concern, but in the short term, you can have that the platform can't get out from the competitive pressure to offer up poorer quality content. And we can think of that as there's a prisoner's dilemma element to this, that even though all the platforms can see that it would be useful to not be providing that echo chamber and encouraging lower quality content because of the flow of ad revenues, they need to respond to that by having algorithms that do promote that type of more attractive content that captures consumer attention. Now, in that model, it's not particularly a competition problem, it's the nature of the competition. And as with consumer protection issues, we can draw on the fact that actually what may work in those situations is that regulation needs to work with platforms to ensure there are other incentive mechanisms and other regulations that are associated with generating higher quality news options rather than seeing it as a problem of competition at the platform level. Because actually there is underlying quite a lot of pro-competitive activity. It's just being directed to a product that is not considered to be actually beneficial to consumers. So in that, we see that there is a lot of interesting issues for competition authorities to be grappling with in this area, that in addition to the ad tech questions that have been well explored already, there are also interesting questions about the quality of content with respect to news media, and also how to balance tensions between content providers and platforms in this very important area. Thank you, and I look forward to speaking with everybody in early December.